Hey everybody, it's Stephanie Ward of fireflycoaching.com. Super excited for our guest today. I'm going to read a short introduction and then we're going to get into it. Today, I'm very honored to be with Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, rooted with the Yoruba people in a more than human world. He's the father to Alethea and Kaya, the grateful life partner to EJ, and a son and a brother. A widely celebrated international speaker, post-humanist thinker, poet, teacher, public intellectual, essayist, and author of 2 books, These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Bayo is also the visionary founder of the Emergence Network and host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains. Welcome, Bayo.
It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon, Stephanie.
I'm delighted to have you here, and I can't wait to hear more about your thoughts on how you market your business and your work, or how you don't. Tell us how you've come to get your work out into the world.
Well, I have to start by confessing the shock of hearing my name aligned in the same sentence with the word business.
Okay, right? I love it.
Because
yeah.
I've never ever thought of myself as being business oriented, marketing oriented, nothing of the sort. But these days, I'm beginning to rethink, business as a multi-species ecology.
Oh, tell us more about that.
And, oh, that is a whole keynote. But I'm exploring it in a course, with the House of Beautiful Business, yes, around, reframing business at the end of time, so to speak, so that business is not just this sectoral work or activity. It's actually some planetary forming technology and consciousness, if you will. But I digress. And your question is about how I market myself.
Well, right? how do you like, so you've created this beautiful body of work, and how do you find people to connect with that work so that people know about it, they hear about it, that people invite you? For example, where I encountered you at the House of Beautiful Business. So what are you doing in the world, whether consciously or proactively or just naturally, that lets you connect with people so that you can share your work?
I think there's a lot of, let me answer it with 2 or within 2 registers, if you will. I'm doing a lot of trusting that if I put out my most beautiful work, that those who are meant to respond to it, and not meant in a predetermined way, but those who feel called to it will respond to it, will come. Basically, it's a gift mentality instead of a scarcity mindset, if you will. And I don't want to reduce things to mindsets and mentality. I know that's a very popular way of thinking, but I tend to relieve myself of the burden of that. In fact, I actually take pains to insist when people say, would you like to share about what you're doing in the world so that people know? And I'm like, don't come. I always emphasize the don't come if you've read my work and you're like, yeah, oh, I'm too comfortable. Because my work is about discomfort. My work is about wounds and opening new trajectories of possibility. My work is about becoming fugitive. My work is about exploring sensuous awakenings. My work is about, becoming animal, becoming monster. These are not exactly things you want to market, right? Because the world seems to have this ecology of business, if you will, that wants you to put your best word out, or your best foot out, so to speak. I'm putting out a limp, right? Instead of fight. I'm putting out a limp and saying, see this wound? If you resonate with it, then you come. So it's usually surprising to me that people do come. And people continue to show up and like, yes, I want to talk about this. I don't think contemporary politics is meeting my desires for emancipatory politics. I would like to think differently about this. I don't have the answers, but my space is about creating room for new explorations. So that's on one hand, it's trust, it's this idea of the gift. But on the other hand, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of, I take pains to cultivate meaningful relationships with people that I care about from across the world, that I rudely call my team, but are actually wonderful curators of impossible arts from the United States to Mexico to India to Nigeria to South Africa and Kenya. Maybe there is something of a capacity to bring people together that I'm learning to always cultivate. And when people come together, they do wonderful things.
Yeah.
That's really the juice here, not anything I really do.
But so I love that, creating meaningful connections. I talk about that all the time. How do you, two things, find the people with whom to create these connections, and then once you've found them, what does creating a meaningful connection look like to you?
I mean, if I told you that this is exactly how I go about finding people, I would be lying. I really haven't actually critically examined this thing. It just comes to me. Okay. And I think there is room for a world that is mysterious enough to be agential in its own right. I just feel like I want to work with this person. And I reach out, I write poetry to the person, and I say, come, let's do some beautiful work together. Let's do it till we're 90 years old. So it's not transactional, it's familial. It's like we need errant, generous, abundant, overflowing, spilling relationships.
Oh, so
in a
beautiful.
in a time when, even the relational is being commoditized and it's part of an algorithm, a processual algorithm that insists that you transact in certain ways. I want to go overboard. I don't want to give people salaries. I don't want to, I want to inquire about your daughter, and I want you to inquire about my son and my family. So those are the ungodly kind of alliances that I'm part of, that spills forth. And there's a lot out there.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're saying, and you said at the beginning that you saw someone, you think, oh, I'd like to work with them. You reach out. Like, for a lot of people, I think I talk about that as well. Actually being proactive and just reaching out to someone and saying, hey, I think you're awesome. Like I did to you. I was like, you're so awesome. Can I talk with you? But to take that step, a lot of people are nervous, or they're afraid, or they're, I don't know, they're fearful around it. So are you ever nervous about reaching out to people, or you just think, well, if they say no, it's fine? Or do you have any feelings around that? Or does it just naturally, you just do it and don't even think about it?
Before I earned a PhD, before I earned a master's, I was a graduate assistant, and I told myself, I'm going to get the greatest writers on the African continent to write on my book. And so I scoured the internet and looked for Chinua Achebe and looked for, Sisi Dangaremba. I looked for Wole Soyinka and wrote them. They said their no's, because I was, like I said, a graduate assistant. I hadn't written anything that was considered, noteworthy, but I wrote to them anyway. It's this, I don't want to call it a can-do entrepreneurial spirit. There's something about saying that, to me, it's more like my wife EJ speaks about it in this way, that it's an overly romantic notion of reality. It does have its shadows and its setbacks, but I actually value it as a way of relating with the world, that we all are going through stuff together, and maybe in connecting you might find meaning in the connection. I'm okay with no's. I'm okay with, no, I can't do this, but I'm going to try anyway.
Okay, that's so beautiful. And I feel like I resonate with what you're saying. Like, it's not just, Nike's just do it, or this, oh, you have to, I don't like the hustle culture either. And I do encourage people like you did. It's if you have this dream or you have a vision, you're like, hey, this would be so cool. And then you take some action to see if you can make it happen, that it's coming from a different place of that other hustle kind of thing. And that you can still be open to reaching out to people, yeah, like you said, from a meaningful place. But it doesn't happen, things don't happen if you just sit there in your room with your beautiful poetry. Like, you have to interact and engage with the world and connect with people.
I mean, visions need conditions of possibility. I rarely see it as people having visions. I often see it as visions having people.
Oh,
That there's something about imagination that is, what does James Hillman, the archetypal psychologist, think of it as? He thinks of it as, that's my son, by the way. He thinks of it as a territorial thing, the anima mundi, right? That mind is external. The public is not just exterior, it's interior. So there's no pure demarcation between the self and ecology. So I don't think of people having visions, sprouting it in their heads. I think that sometimes visions enlist bodies so that it can materialize. And so that's where my sense of trust comes from. That if I'm feeling this, then perhaps there's a molecular disturbance somewhere, in some site, in some place, in some assemblage, in some person. And so I'm going to offer my voice, not as an author, of this vision, but as a reaching out to this federation of possibility so that we can connect fugitively in the middle.
Okay, that's an amazing perspective and another way of looking at it, which I like very much. And you mentioned imagination. When you think about what you see as the typical entrepreneur, business owner, what do you think we're missing that would help us maybe do better or bring our best work into the world?
The question maybe is, do better at what?
At the thing that they're doing. So the work, the consultant or the lawyer or the website designer or the Reiki healer, like the people that are doing this work, because again, we started with the marketing, like you do this work and you want to find the right people to commune with and experience it with and support. And
right.
That can be difficult for people. And you have these really interesting perspectives on ideas, imagination, relational connection. And because you see it and you haven't been thinking like maybe how we've over here, maybe we're thinking too, I don't know, in a different way, like you can see something that could help us release some of that or a different way to approach it. Maybe more the way you approach it, that would be more easeful and authentic, maybe even.
Well, I think this depends a lot on the specificity of the context, the goals, the desires that are operational in that site of power. What I can say, what I feel led to say, is that business is philosophy. I think we don't usually read things that way, but business is a response to a world, is a response to, it's no less, I'm sure you know what I mean by terraforming, right? It's no less an activity in terraforming than farming, than being a cosmonaut or an astronaut or being a permaculture artist. Business terraforms the planet. It's a response to a world. It's like the world asks a question, and the question is secreted by certain formations and socio-material arrangements. And it says, what are you going to do with this? Or what does it mean to be alive today? I think the modes in which we engage the world often comes through with the businesses that we take on. So that suggests to me that doing well is not the only way for a business to thrive.
Yeah.
That that the linearity, the blueprints, and the ways that we frame progress, usually maybe profit making, maybe getting our word out there, being more popular, in expanding our views on Facebook or some other social network. Those are tiny aspects of what businesses as animals, as organisms, as planetary becomings are doing. So to reduce it to our human-centered ways of thinking about it, I think we dismantle or discountenance the gift of failure, the gift of not doing well. See what I told you about why why people might think twice about. Well, I'm about what I call generative incapacitation, which is some fancy way of saying failure is how the world actually generates itself. If everything succeeded or adhere to our goals, then we're inadvertently building a human-centered world, which is already connected to the Anthropocene and is connected to climate chaos and climate loss and displacement and colonialism and imperialism. And now you see how business is part of this loop as well. It's entangled in it.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't know what to say to someone who says, how do I keep a more balanced sheet? Or how do I sell my tomatoes? And I just know those things are important to do. And those things are ways of making sense of the world in all the varied ways we make sense of the world. But I want to disturb the idea that only forward movement is how an organism, such as a business, can thrive. And there are ways that the world escapes meaning making that we're used to.
Yeah. That's fantastic information for everyone who's listening and watching, because of course everyone's always talking about the wins and I'm growing and it's growth and it's exploding and all these, but people don't like to talk about it didn't work well, it failed, I lost money, I'm quitting. And to embrace that and realize that's part of, it's not part of, it's necessary, integral to any kind of growth.
Right. I mean, when I started, my wife and I started the Emergence Network and brought in some friends, we wrote it down that we want to build this with the intention to fail generously. We understood that things die well, right? Yeah. And it liberated us to play in a field. I think about how children play. My boy is out there now screaming, and his voice is also part of this podcast.
Beautiful.
So I welcome. I mean, when he builds things and stacks things upon each other, there's no expectation that they're permanent. Letting them fail, letting them fall apart is what builds things up. It's what allows him to experience the world in certain ways. So I think that that playful cosmology, that playful ontology that allows us to appreciate that when things fall apart, that's how things become new. That's how things become different. It will relieve us of this burden of ever forward movement, which is boring and exhausting and frankly almost pathological at this point in time.
It's doomed for sure. Okay. All right. Super. Thank you so much for all these wonderful insights you've shared. I will summarize them. One last question before we wrap up. What is it that you find most meaningful about the work that you do?
My family, my boy, my daughter, my wife. It's an opportunity to meet myself for the first time. My work is deeply spiritual, and by spiritual, I don't mean, I never refer to the spiritual as something outside of the ordinary, right? I mean it's spiritual, not just because it's meaningful to, but because it casts me or brings me in awe of things that exceed me. Right? The sacred is to stand or kneel or prostrate in awe of things that exceed us. And in the words of Rilke, you know, to be defeated again and again by things that exceed us. I love to be in awe. I love the notion of, not just love the notion, I like to be coddled in the warm embrace of something that is greater than me, a mountain, the peaceful serenity of a river or an ocean. And also the idea that we're not going to figure our problems out by our own means, whatever businesses or blueprints we adopt. That is humbling. And so to be humbled is the closest I can get to this swirling, emergent, indeterminate thing that we rudely call the universe. And yeah, and this is where being with my boy is my business, and I'm his business, and my wife and my daughter, my family is my business. And speaking to the world, speaking to those who would listen, is just one avenue to being humbled again and again. That's what it means for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So very, very beautiful. We will include links to all of Bayo's work, where you can find him, how you can connect, read his books in the show notes. And that just seems like a perfect place to end. So thank you so very much for your time and your wonderful insights. And it's just been beautiful talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great to be here.
Okay.